Hello, I'm Pastor John Powell from Parkview Presbyterian Church in Oak Park, Illinois. And it's Mother's Day this weekend, May the 10th. And as we celebrate this day and as we are mindful, you can see that I am on the interior of Parkview Church. It's a privilege to be here. It's been 2 months since I have been able to come and to check over things and be part of the ministry that we have on the street. Right now it says, "Keep on keeping on," as we continue to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges that it faces, not only to those of us who are able to stay in our homes and have enough food and provision, but for those who are on the front lines in our hospitals, our doctors, nurses, technicians, those in law enforcement, our teachers who are teaching online, our parents who are teaching at home, in all the ways that some of us are struggling to make ends meet in this very weird time for us. It's been now 2 months since we had to cancel services here in the sanctuary. I want to think with you about Mother's Day and how the scriptures have a high view of women. Indeed, Proverbs 31 reminds us of a good woman who can find. And some of us have been very blessed in our lives. I had an amazing mother who raised 4 children. I'm her oldest, the firstborn, and then 2 daughters and then a son. It's been now 7 years since my mother passed into glory on Easter Saturday, the afternoon before Easter, 2013. And some of you also share in having had amazing mothers, and I'm sure you're thinking about them. Some of you are very active as mothers now, helping to raise your kids, your grandkids, bringing counsel, bringing wisdom, bringing perspective, sharing memories, laughing, crying, holding, hugging if you're able. And part of the great tragedy right now is people have been dying without anyone near them, any holy touch, any sacred touch. And so in Proverbs 31, these amazing words, "A good woman who can find, she is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and tasks for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard." We're talking about biblical businesswomen here. In the Old Testament, 1,000 years before Jesus, not to mention the great women of the New Testament, not just Mary, the mother of Jesus, or the women who were there at the crucifixion and the resurrection as witnesses, but Phoebe and Lydia and all of Priscilla, all of these amazing, strong, perceptive women used of the Lord. She girds her loins with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes herself coverings. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates. When he sits among the elders of the land, she makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers girdles to the merchant. Then these wonderful summary words, which are so important. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. For charm is deceitful and beauty is vain. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. The very beginning of the Bible in Genesis, this wonderful woman named Eve, from whom we all have come, and the bone of bone and flesh of flesh, this relationship with Adam, which was a mutuality of relationship and of life. And yet she knew heartache, heartbreak. Her first two, Cain and Abel. Abel, who was killed by his brother Cain. Cain, who was sent off in judgment into exile. What sadness. But God was gracious. And Seth was that one through whom all humanity comes to exist and to be. We could go on with all of the women of the Old Testament: Deborah, Rebecca, Rachel, Abigail, Hannah and her son Samuel. We see these deep and strong women of faith as countered to those of the culture, those of the pagan world around them, those who lost their way. Ruth, whither thou goest, I will go. Your people will be my people. And by the end of that short book of Ruth, the grandmother of King David, and this amazing story that in fact she is more precious to Naomi than 7 sons, it says. And then, of course, Mary, who pondered all these things in her heart and who saw her son Jesus as shepherds and wise men came to kneel and to celebrate and to rejoice with heaven itself. And then we see her at the cross in grief, in mourning, but expectation. There's something about women in our lives that for many men, they don't realize that the way they treat their sisters is how they will end up treating their mothers, their wives. And how they treat their mothers is how they learn how to love their grandchildren. It is a great journey of life. And sometimes, even in the midst of heartache or trouble or trial, we discover the greatest lessons which make all the difference. In a way, that's what it is like now with COVID-19. We are being pressed together. We are being stretched and strained. But we are also discovering the deeper lessons of life and love. This wonderful book, God is No Fool, by Lois Cheney, has a heart-touching moment when a whole family gathers around an aged, frail mother, grandmother, and how their love is an evidence and demonstration like unto Christ. So faith, hope, love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Love has many faces. Once I watched 6 people coming out of a house to enter a car. The young father strode with lazy purposefulness and nonchalant strength, carrying a wheelchair folded up in one hand. He moved to the car and stood holding the door open. A young boy burst out of the house and exploded down the stairs, arriving at the car after a swift, circuitous route that examined every step of the yard, the walk, and the nearby road. Then he stood, patient in his impatience, opening and closing another of the car's doors in careless enjoyment. Another child skipped, ran, and jumped in a direct path to the car. And once there, she snatched the wheelchair, which was leaning against the car. She lunged into it after first jerking it open. She wheeled it tight in little circles, first in one direction, then another, then streaked down the sidewalk, jammed to a stop, whirled around, and tore back to the car, all midst her own chorus of sounds and whoops. The young mother had followed between husband and children, glancing at each of them in turn, wrapping them in care and love and easy acceptance. Then she looked back at the house with the same kind of care. Emerging slowly from the door came an old man, slight of build, weak but not frail, cautious and not unsure. He had his arms around an old woman who was apparently his wife. She was weak and frail, cautious and unsure, shuffling slowly, guided by an arm of love at her back and a hand of love covering one of her own. She made her way slowly to the waiting car, waiting man, waiting woman, waiting children, and waiting wheelchair. All this took about 5 minutes, and I felt I had watched more love and more strength and more acceptance than I'd ever read or studied about. It was a scene of life, encased in love in all its many forms. Every face in this group wore a smile, some easier, more casual than others. And I smiled constantly the rest of the evening, and I felt good. And I think God smiled too. Let us pray. Lord, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our heart be acceptable in your sight as we rejoice in our mothers, in the mothers around us, in what it means to live and love and learn and labor in and through and because of the love of Christ. Amen. God bless you and yours in this season and in these days. Amen.